So the apparent issue with this view reflects my familiarity with the technological progress in the Western societies. The interchangeability of terms like consciousness and the expansion, social progress, and the evolution is now almost commonplace in the popular press, and these ideas are seldom entirely almost commonplace in the popular press, as I said, in sophisticated accounts of human evolution. Therefore, but the idea of progress and the evolution is unnoticed as a habit left over from misinformed common sense. See this, from seeing the world in terms of design, the problem is that our intuitive model for evolution is borrowed from the history of technological change, which has been a cumulative process adding traces to the recordings each day. In contrast, biological evolution is not additive, in some cases, except for some very limited ways in which the human repertoire of expressed genes is about the same as in the mouse or frog. And the body plans of all vertebrates seems to be mostly modifications of the same shared plan. Even for the brain, though we are on the large end of the range of body and brain sizes, this is not a result of adding new organs, but merely enlarging existing ones with slight modifications. Evolution is an irreversible process, and a process of increasing diversification and distribution. We are familiar with this facet of our lives, but how, you may ask, could I feel so confident that it is not part of what you'd call the mental experience of other species? And so I'm sure that they do not share these kinds of thoughts and concerns when they cannot be queried about them. That's just it. My answer, which will be argued in detail in the following chapters, has everything to do with language and is merely made up of communication. It is also the outward expression of an unusual mode of thought and a symbolic representation. Without symbolization, the entire virtual world that I have described is out of reach. It's inconceivable. My extravagant, chaotic claim that I know other species cannot rest on the evidence that symbolic thought does not come innately built in. It develops by internalizing the symbolic process that underlies language. So species that have not required and acquired the symbolic process that underlies this language, it's internalizing the symbolic process in an acquired ability to communicate symbolically that cannot have been acquired by the ability to think whatsoever in this way. The way that language represents objects, events, and relationships provides a uniquely powerful economy of reference. It offers a means for generating an essentially infinite variety of novel representations and an unprecedented infinitude of predicting events and organizing memories, memes, and planning behaviors. It's entirely shaped by our thinking in ways that we know in the physical world. It is so pervasive and inseparable from human intelligence, in general, that it's so difficult to distinguish what aspects of the human intellect have not been modeled by streaming it. To explain this different and describable evolutionary circumstances that brought the difference and the ultimate challenge in studying of the human origin. The question that ultimately motivates the perennial fascination with human origins is not who, where, and how our ancestors did it, or how they came to walk upright on this earth, or even how they discovered the use of stone tools. It is not really a question that has been asked by the paleontologists. It's a question that might be otherwise asked by psychologists, or neurologists, or even philosophers. Where do human minds come from? The missing link that we hope to fill in by investigating human origins is not so much a gap in our family tree, but a gap that separates us from other species in general. Knowing how something originated from tens of thousands of cues and clues how it works, something originated from something else, and we know that human consciousness had a beginning. Those features of our mental abilities that distinguish us from all other species arose within the handful of millions of years. Since we shared a common ancestor with the remaining Africanic, and probably can mostly be traced to events that took place only within the last 2 million years. It was a Rubicon that was crossed at a definite time in a specific evolutionary context. If we could identify what has been different on either side of the divide, differences in ecology, behavior, anatomy, especially neuroanatomy, differences in perhaps the critical changes that catapulted us into this unprecedented world full of abstractions, change, stories, and possibilities and plausibilities that we call human. It is not just the origins of the biological spectrum of the species that we seek to explain, but the origin of the novel form of the mind. Biologically, we're just another ape. Mentally, we are a new phylum of organisms. And these two seemingly incommensurate facts lies the conundrum that must be resolved before we have an adequate explanation of what it means to be human. Advances in the study of human evolution, the brain, and language processes have led many scientists confidently to claim to be closing in on the final clues of this mystery. How close are we? Many lines of evidence seem to be converging on an answer. With respect to our ancestry, the remaining gaps in the fossil evidence of the prehistory are being rapidly filled in. Within the last few decades of remarkably rich pictures of sizes and shapes unknown to humankind before that, the critical changes, probably fairly said, changes the distinguished ways from other apes that have been found to be lived, and missing links in the brains that have emerged since. We're basically evolving in diversification in all directions, but there's an option available in some directions for others. Organisms starting out small and short-lived and can't get much smaller than that, but they can always get larger and more long-lived. For the smallest organisms, the resources that can be devoted to external and internal representations of the world are limited. Though even bacteria appear able to use one information storage systems. Their genes to take up information from around them and modify their behaviors appropriately. But the upper end of the range of information handling abilities is not similarly bounded. And so the indifference between the low end and the upper end of this range has increased over hundreds of millions of years in animal evolution as part of the diversification. Nevertheless, the number of small brain creatures has not diminished because of the competition with big brains and no-brainers, all the plants and single-celled organisms, vastly outnumbered by the rest of us. It's just happening, and that's one very, very minor evolutionary direction towards a niche where doing a lot of information processing during one's life is a good way to part it onto the genes. Inevitable? Well, it's about as inevitable as the direction and evolution and the development of Arctic fish, and the niche was just there and was eventually filled. Still, in some measure, we are near the extreme of this distribution. The question then is whether the evolution of language is somehow prefigured in this trend. Is there a general trend towards better communication? It's easy in hindsight to arrange the history of long-distance communication from telegraph to telephone to smartphone to Star Trek communications. It's not easy to determine if the animal communication has been steadily gaining weight better than human language as part of such a trend. Certainly, there's an advance in distance and signal clarity and evolution, and apparently simple species can use highly complex methods of sound and communication through highly oblivious ways to their advantage in their communication. They also many great sound tricks used in such an echolocation that is completely beyond human ability. Among our closest close relatives in the animal kingdom, orangutans and such, in fact, most birds easily outshine the mammal, and the mammal vocal scales also, and though dogs and cats and horses and monkeys are remarkably capable learners in many domains, vocalization is not one of them. Our remarkable vocal abilities are not a part of this trend, but an exception. We also tend to underestimate the complexity and subtlety of much non-human social communication. In recent decades, field studies of social communication in non-human species have demonstrated that many birds and primates and social carnivores use extensive vocal ranges and gestural repertoires of structure their language and social groups. These provide a medium for organizing, foraging, and group movement, for identifying individuals of the group and maintaining and restructuring multidimensional social hierarchies, for meditating and mediating age given even in our own species. A rich, complex language is still no substitute for shocked expressions and shock. A muffled laugh or a flood of silent tears, for example, when it comes to communicating some of the more important messages of human social relationships. However, although they are complex, they elaborate repertoires of cell division, displays, and gestures that take on and the map of any of the elements that compose the outer language shade. Although various researchers have suggested that parcels and parallels to certain facets of a language are to be found in these learned dialects of a bird song, for external references evident to the vervet monkeys' alarms and calls, honeybee dances, and the socially transmitted sequences of sound that make up the humpback whale songs. These are many other examples like them have only been exhibited in the artificial resemblance of the language, learning, word, reference, and syntax, respectively. Even if we are to be granted these parallels, no non-human species appear to be put in the facets of language together within the coordinated, rule-governed system that could have been missed and recognized as a cloud system.